Hi, welcome to the Property Gurus. This video is about building control for extensions. We recently posted a similar video focusing on loft conversions, and we've been asked by a number of subscribers if we could go through all of the detail for extensions. So today we're going to talk about what building control is, why you need it, what your options are in terms of who you can get to do it for you and how much it's going to cost. And then we will run through all of the stages of your extension project that have to be checked by building control. And it's a lot more involved than for a loft conversion. If you've seen our loft conversion video, you'll know that there's really only 4 stages that have to be inspected. For extensions, it can be up to 9 different inspections. So it is a bit more involved, and we'll go through all of those stages later in this video. We'll also talk about the paperwork involved, why it's important to you, and we'll show you an example of the completion certificate that you need, which will form part of the pack you need when you come to sell your property. Okay, so first off, what is building control and why do you need it? Well, building control is an independent body that assesses the build of your project. So it's independent qualified inspectors who come out to your house at different stages throughout the build and check that everything has been done correctly and in line with the current building regulations. In the UK, building regulations stipulate exactly how things have to be built to meet legal requirements. And building inspectors are authorised to come out and check the build to make sure that everything has been done to a satisfactory standard. So it actually works in your favour. Building control is an independent check to make sure your builder has done everything that he should have done and that it is all legal, because it's done at different stages. And the reason for that is that a lot of them are very difficult to change later. So as an example, foundations. Obviously, once a foundation has been done and gets built upon, it's virtually impossible to change that later. So you need somebody to come out and check that everything's being done at the right time and in the right manner before you can move on to the next stage of your build. So building control, really important for you as the homeowner, because it makes sure, it gives you peace of mind, make sure everything's been done correctly, and make sure that you're not going to have any future problems either structurally or with paperwork by not having everything signed off correctly. So that's what building control is and why you need it. You have 2 options. The first option is to use your local authority. Every local authority has a building control function. Companies who offer private building control services, and there are a lot of different companies that offer this. So if you go onto Google and type in "I need building control" or "building control officer," then you'll get a whole host of different companies pitching to you and looking to win the business. There are pros and cons on using either the local authority or private, and we'll talk about those now. So in our experience, we've found that the service offered by the local authority is actually very good. They have a number of different offices, so generally they'll have 4 or 5 or possibly even more, depending on how big your local area is. They are really commercial. You can phone up and ask them about whatever it is that you're concerned about, whether it be installation of steels, foundation, the roof structure, electrics, anything that you want. You can phone up and get some advice. They'll give you some help as to how things should be done. And they'll also come out at short notice. We've found that usually local authorities will come out on 24 hours notice. Might be 48 hours if they're extremely busy or they're short-staffed, but it's generally within 1 or 2 days. And that's important to you because on your build, you'll need them to come out at certain points. So using the foundation example again, once you've dug the foundations, they'll need to come out and check that they're happy with everything before you can pour the concrete. And what you don't want is to have a 4 or 5 day delay where your builders can't actually do any more work. So it is important that you can book them in advance and that they come out at the agreed time, give you the sign off, and then you can move forward with the build. So it is important to have good availability. We've found local authority has that. We haven't had any problems with any local authority, so we're definitely happy using local authority. The main difference between private and the local authority building control is the price. The price is slightly higher for private companies. They charge a bit more. They have to register your job with the local authority anyway, because they are ultimately the body who has to record everything. So you've basically added a middleman into the arrangement, and there isn't a little bit extra to pay for that. It's not a huge amount, but we found that it is cheaper to use local authority. We find the service good with local authority, and we would use them every time. After we posted our YouTube video on loft conversions, we also had quite a lot of comments from our subscribers saying that they'd had negative experience using private building control, and that they wished they'd used the local authority, that there weren't enough checks done, that they didn't feel comfortable or confident that everything was being signed off sufficiently. So anecdotally, again, we've heard that people prefer the independence of local authority, but it's entirely your call. There are a lot of very good private building control companies, so it's entirely down to you. But fundamentally, you will need to use one. One thing to bear in mind if you do decide to use the private company is that it does take a little bit longer to set everything up. So when you use building control, you have to notify them 2 days in advance of the start of your works. So whenever you're starting, the notice has to go in 2 days before. When you use private building control, they need an extra 3 or 4 days on top of that 2 days so that they can then submit the notice to the local authority. So there is a little bit more of a time delay with private building control than the local authority, but it's pretty small. On the issue of notification, let's have a look online of how you go about doing that. This is a really simple process, and definitely something that you can do yourself. You don't need your builder to do it. You don't have to employ a surveyor to do this on your behalf. So it's really simple. You can do it if you're confident enough. So let's have a look. This is an example of the building control notice for Merton Council. So you see here, it's a standard form that you use, and you put your name and address, the name and address of the site if that's different, if it's not your house that you're doing the work at. And then you need to just describe the works. And that's a very simple description. So in this example, you'd put rear extension or side return extension, or whatever the details of the job consists of. So everything's pretty straightforward. Now there's a section here on fees, and that's all detailed at the back of the form. So if we scroll through, there is a table here. So table 2 talks about the different options that you've got. So the 2 sections we're interested in predominantly here are section 3, which is any extension between 10 square meters and 40 square meters, which probably covers most extensions. And you can see the fees here that are payable. And the one below that is between 40 meters and 60 meters. And again, the details are all listed here. If you're building a much larger extension, so if you're going more than 60 square meters, which is fairly significant, then you'll have to pay a percentage based on how much you're paying for the build. So you can see if we scroll down, there's a table that lists out the cost of the works, and then there are applicable fees that link to how much you're paying for that work. So that's if you're building a much bigger extension than a standard version. So that's building control notification. Really simple, really easy, definitely something you can do yourself. Okay, so let's move on to the stages that will be inspected by building control for your extension. The first stage is the initial visit. So this is essentially building control coming out just to check the situation of your property and make sure that it matches to the plans that have been submitted. So the notification we talked about previously, you will have to provide building control with your plans, including structural drawings and structural calculations. They will then come out to your house and check that everything is as you've said it is. So they're just checking the situation of your house, any surrounding houses, the drains, all of those sort of issues that they will need to understand the location of. Now, the initial visit sometimes is tied in to stage 2. So the next stage that they come out and check is the foundations. Foundations will need to be dug for your extension. When you're adding any walls to the property, then you need to dig sufficient foundations. And they will come out once those foundations have been dug. Your building inspector will come out and needs to check both the depth of the foundation and the way that they've been constructed, and he will be checking to make sure that there's no trees close by or any other obstructions, whether there's any drainage, existing drains that you've found and come across. So you might find that there's a pipe or cables or other issues in those foundations, or whether the water table is high in your area. So if he comes out and your foundations are full of water, then they'll need to take a view as to what the best way of addressing that is. So that's the first major check, is the foundations. Once they've been dug, he will check the structure of the foundations, the depth of the foundations, and anything close to the foundations that may cause an issue. The biggest issue here is usually trees. So if you have a tree within 5 meters of your foundations, then it might be that the building control officer is concerned and may ask for those foundations to be deeper. The third inspection is the oversight inspection, which is essentially checking the floor to your extension. So this is basically once you've dug out your foundations and you're about to actually lay the subfloor. So generally that will involve some hardcore, which is broken bricks and all sorts of masonry. And then you will pour a concrete slab, and on top of that, you'll have insulation and damp-proof membrane. Building control will want to check that's been laid correctly so that it's solid and isn't going to cause any movement or issues in the future, that the damp-proof membrane has been inserted correctly and isn't going to cause issues in the future with rising damp, and that the insulation meets the current building regulations. So they're basically checking that the subfloor to your new extension has been built correctly and isn't going to result either in any movement, subsidence, or damp issues in the future. So really important check for you to make sure that everything's been done. It'll be watertight, it'll be solid, strong, and not going to move in the future. The next check will be the installation of your steels. So you're likely to have some steel beams inserted to support the existing property, the rear of the house, if you're opening up the rear or the side or both. And building control will want to come, check the connections on those steels and check that everything is in line with the structural drawings and calculations before you carry on with the build. The next check is the damp-proof course. So this is the actual structure that you're building. So generally it'll be in bricks or blocks or both. And the builder will need to insert a damp-proof course, which is basically a layer of thick plastic membrane which stops damp rising up from the ground into the walls of your property. So you may be familiar with the concept of rising damp. This is where capillary action sucks water up from the ground below, and you can get damp patches in your wall all around your house. To prevent that, a damp-proof membrane is laid before you build everything, and it's lapped up into the bricks and the blocks, and that basically is at a lower level of your build and stops all that water penetrating up into your property. So that's a really important check for you as well as the homeowner, to make sure that rising damp is never going to be a problem with your new build. The next check is the laying of your drains. Again, a really important issue for you as the homeowner. So building control will come out. They'll want to see that all the drains have been laid with the correct fall so that the water runs away to the external sewer, that it's been bedded in correctly, so it might be set in gravel or sand or something softer. It's got the ability for a little bit of movement, usually gravel, and that it's got access points at the appropriate areas. So you need to be able to rod that drain at some point in the future if there's some sort of blockage. So there may be some internal or external or both in terms of the access to those drains. But they will come out before any concrete or anything permanent is poured over those pipes. They need to come out, check that they're happy with the connections, with the way it's been laid and the way it's been set. And then they will sign off for your builder to essentially bury those drains under your extension, and you'll never see them again. So really important that gets done. The next check is your floor joists. Building control will come out and check the grade of the timber, that it's the right size. it's been laid correctly, that the noggins and the joints and everything has been done to current regulations, and that essentially it's going to be strong enough to support your floor and there won't be any movement, and ideally no creaking and groans and all the other annoying things that you can get if things are not built correctly. The next check is to test your drains. So building control will actually want to come out and see your drains operating in practice. So they previously checked out the pipes and everything was being built correctly. Now that it's all finished, they'll want to see water running to make sure it's actually flowing through into the sewer. They want to see the toilets flushed if there's a toilet, and just making sure that everything is functioning correctly. And the final check that building control undertake is completion. So they will come out once everything has been finalised. So everything's been done, it's all plastered, all your electrical sockets are in place, the taps are in, and they're checking that everything then meets building regulations. And this is things like fire regulations. So they'll need to see smoke alarms, a heat alarm in your kitchen. They'll need to check that all of your sockets have been set in the wall at the appropriate height. Any electrical installations are not too close to the water where your sink is, that your ventilation has been done correctly, that any glazing meets current standards. So basically making sure everything is completely compliant with building regulations. If your builder has built up a good relationship with building control, the final check is usually quite straightforward because they'll have seen things along the way. So they'll have seen the position of the plugs and everything that's being built out on an ongoing basis. So hopefully your completion check is relatively straightforward, but it's just a final check to make sure that everything has been done correctly and that the building officer can then sign off. So once the building control officer's done his final check, he will then issue you with a completion certificate. So here's one from a previous job here. You can see it's a really simple, short letter from building control to you, confirming that everything has been checked and signed off. Now, it doesn't look very impressive, but it is a really important document for you because when you come to sell your house, you'll have to provide evidence that building control checked off and signed everything on your build. So really important that you get that piece of paper because otherwise you'll have problems when you come to sell your property. So hopefully that's given you a good understanding as to what building control is, why you need it, what the options are in terms of who you can use, and the stages that will be checked throughout the course of your extension. We've been the Property Gurus. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.